The most important event of the past 1,000 years of church history was the Protestant Reformation, when Martin Luther and the other reformers recovered biblical truth that had been lost for 1,000 years. But Martin Luther wasn't the first. 200 years before Martin Luther, there was a man named John Wycliffe. He also believed that the Bible was the only source of authority, not popes or councils, just like Luther. He, in fact, was the first to translate the Bible into English so that it could be understood by all Englishmen. Wycliffe was a priest, but he rejected the papacy as unbiblical. He didn't believe in purgatory or indulgences, nor did he believe in transubstantiation, the somewhat magical process where the bread and the wine is supposed to become the actual body and blood of Jesus Christ. The followers of Wycliffe were given the name Lollards. Lollards. Interesting. Nobody is really sure what it means, but it was intended to be an insult. However, the followers embraced the name and carried it on. And 200 years later, when Henry VIII broke with the Pope and formed the Church of England in order to be able to marry Anne Boleyn, it was the Lollards who formed the evangelical wing of the church and who actually brought biblical doctrine into the church, not Henry VIII himself. He, in fact, never left the doctrine of the Catholic Church. Wycliffe also had to deal with a pandemic. During his lifetime, the Black Plague arrived in England, and 1/3 of the population perished because of it. Wycliffe himself died in 1345. 31 years after his death, a church council had a trial for Wycliffe, condemned him, proclaimed him to be a heretic and unfit to be buried in the church grounds. But it wasn't until 44 years after his death that his bones were finally dug up and burned and the ashes thrown into the river. So why didn't the Reformation start with John Wycliffe? Well, one answer is that there was no printing press at that time. So all of his Bibles and books had to be copied by hand, whereas later Luther's writings were widely published and spread his message all over. It is important to know, though, that the writings of Wycliffe influenced another early believer, a man by the name of John Huss. John Huss was condemned as a heretic by the same council that condemned John Wycliffe as a heretic. Only Huss was alive at that time, and he was burned at the stake. A few years later, when Martin Luther was still just a monk searching for truth, he came across the writings of John Huss. So it went from Wycliffe to Huss to Luther. And from there on, Luther proceeded to the process that began the Protestant Reformation.